We're going to make a beginning in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. My brothers and sisters, let us bring ourselves into the presence of God more clearly and ask that anything that would stop us from entering into tonight we may leave behind just for now, and that God might open our minds and our hearts to receive his word, and that in this Pentecost week God's Spirit might enliven us to receive that word which might help us be better missionaries of the good news in our daily living. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. It is such a joy and such an honour to be back with you. As I said, there were moments in the last couple of years that I didn't know this was actually going to happen. And so we are, as you know, in Australia, we went into these very long lockdowns, and also they closed the international border. So we were unable to leave the country. Extraordinary, but true. We never thought we would live through anything like this. Incredible. But it's wonderful to be back. This is when I come to Los Angeles, St. Bede is my home away from home. Although, given that the Monsignor is now moving to the cathedral will soon be my home away from home. We'll see how we get on. What I want to do tonight is to talk to you about the Ten Commandments. I've said that we're not done with them and they're not finished with us. And that's because, in fact, they just need a bit of a makeover for us to understand how powerful they actually are. Let me start by telling you a story. Many years ago, I was teaching at one of our Jesuit high schools in Australia, and we had parent-teacher night, where you had to account to the parents for how their kids were going. And this very famous judge and his wife came along, and I was teaching their son in year 10, so he's 15 years of age. And I was teaching him religious education. And this man was very famous, and also very famous for being formidable. He was full and aware of his full stature as a very famous judge. He came forward, sat down, and after I gave a bit of a report about how his son was going in the religious education class, he slammed his hand on my desk and said, "I'm paying a lot of money for this Jesuit education, and my boy doesn't know the 10 Commandments." And I looked back at him and I said, "Well, I'm not sure why you haven't taught him the 10 Commandments." I said, "Everything else is up on the fridge door. Why didn't you put the 10 Commandments up on the fridge door?" Because knowing them off by heart is one thing, and that's a good thing. The whole point is living them. And you, of course, have to know that our Lord himself came along and took the 10 Commandments and turned them into 3. Love God, love your neighbour, love yourself. So the point is not knowing them off by heart, which I hope your son does know at some stage, but I hope he always knows, as a result of his expensive Jesuit education, that he's got to love God, love his neighbour, and love himself. To which his wife turned and said, "I told you not to take on a Jesuit." Well, you can take on a Jesuit as much as you like, but what I just said is absolutely the facts. But here we go. They're in fact not 10 commandments. In the Old Testament, in fact, there are 613 commandments, and they cover everything from murder and stealing, dietary laws, skin diseases, bodily functions, to temple laws and religious worship. And in fact, the 10 Commandments are very important because our Jewish brothers and sisters were one of the first and earliest monotheistic religions in the world, so only one God. Everybody around them had multiple gods. And here Judaism was, their God not only was one God, but a God who wanted to have a personal relationship with them. He sought them out to enter into the covenant, and these laws come out of that covenant. And he claimed these people as himself. But there was a price. We have to say that the God of the Jews will often rewarded those who had good behaviour and punished the bad. So if you stayed on God's right side, you're pretty good, and if you got on the wrong side, you are in strife. Is that sounding familiar to any Catholic in this congregation right now? Because in actual fact, when we come to the New Testament, Jesus does something quite different. Sometimes we always think there's only a continuity. There is continuity, obviously, between our Judaism, our Jewish brothers and sisters, and the Lord, and then into the Christian revelation. But there's significant differences too. Jesus doesn't punish anyone. He didn't turn anybody into a pillar of salt. He didn't send a plague. He doesn't send a curse. Not once. In fact, nobody goes to Jesus with two bad legs, and he doesn't like the look of one bad leg, and he doesn't like the look of them, so he gives them two bad legs for their trouble. No one goes worse off for the encounter with Jesus. That's a different image. And Jesus says, to have seen me is to have seen the Father. I do nothing on my own. The Father and I are one. So when we see Jesus in action, we see the Lord, we see God definitively in action for the world. So we do have those wonderful parts of the New Testament, of the Old Testament, where God is exquisitely loving and tender and forgiving. But when it comes to these 613 laws, God could also be pretty tough. And there didn't seem to be a hierarchy in their importance. They all seemed to equally matter, which affected Catholicism, I'd have to say. Every law was of the same value. A very quick story. My Auntie Margaret in 1956 was a registered nurse, and she was doing a diploma in surgical nursing. And she tells the story that one Tuesday night, they went from case to case to case to case to case to case, rushing from theatre to theatre in this big public hospital in Sydney. And Margaret said when she got off work, she had not eaten for 12 hours. So it was that busy. And so she came home to her apartment and she made herself a big plate of bacon and eggs. And she was famished. She devoured it. She wondered where her flatmate was. And next minute, the door opened and in walked her flatmate, sporting a big black ash on her forehead. Oh my God. It's Ash Wednesday, and it's 1956, and she's just eaten the bacon and eggs. Now, my Auntie Margaret is not some religious nut or a zealot or somebody obsessive and compulsive. She was a normal Catholic for her time. So what did she do? She rushed off to the bathroom to try and make herself throw up. Secondly, when that didn't work, she got on the bus, or she got on the bus and went to the place where she was hoping, where you still can, go to the earliest confessions you can go to. She thought she was in a state of serious mortal sin, and if she died, she would go to hell. So she got on the bus successfully, but imagine she got run over by the bus. Not successfully on the bus, as did happen. Here's what we thought would happen. Margaret would have gone to God, and God would say to my Auntie Margaret, Margaret, you have been a wonderful woman. You've gone to Mass on Sunday. You've said your rosary every day. You've gone to Mass during the week. You've been a wonderful nurse, particularly for the poor. But Margaret, what are we going to do about the bacon, honey? I'm sorry, Margaret. That's a deal breaker. Hell for you for eternity. Next. That's what we believed. It's like those commandments had no hierarchy, no context. We suffered from that as much as our Jewish brothers and sisters seem to have suffered from it as well. So, when I was coming to write the book that I wrote, it came out while we've all been in lockdown and in COVID time, called The Law of Love. One chapter of it is about the Ten Commandments. And I came across this wonderful, wonderful article by a guy called Brian Appleyard. And he wrote a book about Sinai of the Times. He was struck how that in every management manual these days, every college of professional people, they were all coming up with the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments of good management, the 10 Commandments of child raising, the 10 Commandments. And he's a Jewish guy, but a secular Jew and a non-practicing Jew. He's an Englishman. And he thought, isn't it interesting that everything still comes down to the 10 Commandments, even though it's now in a very secular context. So as a Jewish person, at least culturally, he decided to go back to the 10 Commandments and have a look at them and see whether they had anything to say to modern society. And I think what he wrote was stunning. Here we go. He says, this is when everyone prays, "I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me." He says, be serious. You shall not make for yourself an idol. Get real. You can't serve several gods. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Be humble. You are a creature, not the creator. Remember the Sabbath, and by keeping it as a holy day. He says that stands for be quiet. That gave you a little moment to be quiet. That was good. Honour your father and mother. Respect age. You shall not murder. Do not kill, for all murder is suicide. You shall not commit adultery. Mean what you say. You shall not steal. Do not steal, for all murder is, all the world will die. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbour. He says that's honour others. Their frailties are usually your own. And then the last one. You shall not covet your neighbour's house, wife, servant or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbour. Be kind, be generous, and don't sleep around. Now, I like these because in a modern way, here's how they work out. Be serious, get real. You can't serve several gods. Be humble. The creature is not the creator. Be quiet, respect age. Don't kill, or we'll all end up committing suicide. Mean what you say. Do not steal, or there'll be nothing left for anybody. Honour others. Their frailties are usually your own. Be kind, be generous, and don't sleep around. You know, if you said that to any secular audience, they would go, oh, that's magnificent. Where did you get that from? The book of Deuteronomy and the book of Exodus. Because all it took was somebody to have insight into what that could mean in modern language in a way that brings it alive. So, I want to think about these very carefully right now. So, to be serious, I want to show you very soon a clip out of 2 ads that were shown in the United Kingdom. Because as hard as we try not to do it, we can end up worshipping many things. But I want to tell you a story about worship. A number of years ago, in fact in 2014, Mulberry, this very famous UK company, brought out an ad for Christmas to sell their top range bag, which is apparently worth in US dollars something like $4,000 or $5,000 for a handbag. Wow. Anyway, $4,000 or $5,000 for a handbag. And so they made this ad very seriously. This was not a tongue-in-cheek ad. And there they all are, unwrapping all their presents on Christmas morning, and everyone's trying to outdo one another. Someone gives a little puppy that waves. Somebody did a homemade portrait. Somebody gave a unicorn, which don't exist last I checked. And then eventually somebody gives the young Keira Knightley lookalike a Mulberry bag. And she's terribly excited. You'll soon see why. The outrage to that ad was consoling, because all of a sudden people said, that's the problem with us right now. We're worshipping a bag. We think that matters more than anything else. So the following year, Mulberry decided to take the outrage and do something with it. So the second ad I want to show you as well, because it's immensely powerful and very, very insightful. Here we have a couple. She's pregnant with they haven't had a child, but they look like they're in a stable. And this small couple are in a small, simple room, maybe a stable, with a single exposed light bulb over their head, the star. And then eventually they've got this red bag, the same bag that they're trying to sell. And in come shepherds who have heard all about the bag, and in come these guys who have been out at a party, but they've got crowns on like the 3 wise men. And then the kicker is, the final graphic is, it's Christmas. What are you worshipping? Christmas starts with Christ. This was a secular company who picked up the criticism, turned around the ad, and put Christ back into Christmas. I want to warn you, in the first ad, there's a moment where there's not a cuss word as such. She says, shut up, but she says it very strongly. But I know you'll cope because Christ heard it before you did, and he coped too. So let's enjoy now these two ads about what we worship.
It looks really good on you. Thank you.
Wow. Did you do that?
Yeah, it took me ages.
Look. Thank you.
Merry Christmas, darling.
Thank you, Mum. Oh. Gosh.
And he waves.
You ready for this? Wait. It's a unicorn.
Thank you. Thank you, Grandma. Shut up! Oh my God! Yes! Oh, yes! Thank you! I love it! I love it! Look at it! Look at it! This is the best present ever!
I know we weren't going to do presents, but here.
Oh my God, Joe. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. It's absolutely amazing.
Evening. I heard you had a new bag.
Well, yes, I literally just opened it.
Lordy, lordy. Do you mind if I... Oh, isn't that a picture?
Hi-ho! The door was open, so I thought I'd...
May I? Oh, there it is.
I wouldn't normally go for red, but that really works, doesn't it? Someone's a very lucky girl.
Yes, I know.
Sorry, traffic was a nightmare.
We come bearing gifts. Thank you, whoever you are.
Well, this is truly marvelous.
It smells amazing.
It's a thing of wonder.
Quite stupendous.
Guys, it's just a bag.
Is that your donkey?
No, I thought it was yours.
What are we worshipping? Get serious. The second one is get real. If we believe, then we have to follow that, we have to get real about the demands that our belief in God makes on our daily lives. Now, some of our atheist brothers and sisters, they tell us that we believe in imaginary friends, that we're psychologically impaired, and sort of God is some sort of extraordinary psychological projection, a crutch that some of us need to get through life. Well, that's not true, and I've written about this in several of my books, as some of you know. But honestly, the bottom line is that the only way to know things is not just through scientific knowledge, as powerful and important as that might be. Scientific knowledge is extremely important, but it's not the only way to know things. There's emotional intelligence, there's spiritual intelligence, there's all sorts of ways to know things. And particularly through experience, how I come to know beauty and justice and faithfulness and peace and goodness isn't because they've been put in a petri dish in a scientific laboratory. It's because we've encountered their presence and their absence. That's how we come to know things. Well, how I've come to know the living God, how I've come to know Jesus Christ, is through an encounter with Christ. It's experiential knowledge. It's spiritual information. It's spiritual intelligence. And that's as powerful and as strong today as it's ever been before. Mind you, I love the story of the time the atheist was walking through Yosemite National Park. And he was walking through the Yosemite National Park. He's wondering, looking at the wonderful rivers, the great animals, the extraordinary rivers, and he heard a rustling in the bushes behind him. And he now saw an 8-foot brown bear coming straight for him. Our atheist starts running up the path as fast as he could. He starts to run even faster. His heart's pumping frantically. He goes even faster still. It's then he trips, falls to the ground, rolls over, and he now finds the brown bear on top of him, ready to take a final fatal swipe and take him out. It's then that our atheist looks up into the heavens and says, "Oh my God, save me!" Time stopped. The bear froze. The sound of the forest was silent. It was then that that famous bright light shone upon the man, and the equally famous voice came from the heavens and said, "Let me get this right. You tell everybody that I don't exist, that creation's a cosmic accident, and anybody who believes in me needs help. And now in your hour of need, you want me to save you as a Christian believer. Is that the deal going down here?" To which the atheist looks up and says, "Oh God, I realize it would be wrong of you to save me as a Christian believer. I get that. But maybe you could make the bear a Christian believer." "What a good idea," says God. And with that, the light was out, the sound was gone, the voice was out, and the man was so relieved to see the bear immediately bring down his paws, even more relieved to see the bear sit back on his haunches, a little interested when he saw the bear bring the paws together, and decidedly uncomfortable when he heard the bear say, "For this food which I'm about to receive, make me grateful. Through Christ our Lord. Amen." And then he ate the man. We're in there, are we? Okay, we'll keep going. The next one is to be humble. The word humility has to be one of the most misunderstood words in the English language. The word humility doesn't mean you put yourself down. The word humility, humilus, comes from a Hebrew word, humus, from which we get a certain dip that some of us like. And the word humus in Hebrew means to be grounded. So it's the action of grounding down the chickpeas that turns that word into a dip. They grounded it. Humus, to be grounded. So when we are truly humble, then we are people who are the creatures, not the creator. St. Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, and you know, I've said it before, a Jesuit cannot get through a talk without mentioning St. Ignatius Loyola. Well, here he is. And St. Ignatius said that one of the worst sins we can commit is where we think we are the creator, not the creature. We want to be God. And in fact, if you read the story in Genesis chapter 2 of original sin really carefully, then you'll know how powerful that is. What's the promise of the talking serpent? It is, if you eat of the tree of knowledge, you will be like God. Original sin is where we want to run the show. We want to be completely in charge of my life, and while we're at it, everybody else's life as well. I think the common phrase we would use now is a control freak, where we want to be a control freak in everybody's life. That's original sin. Isn't that a wonderful way into that, to think about that insight? So original sin was where we don't want to be a creature anymore. We want to be God and act like God. But true humility does not ask us to put ourselves down. It means that we worship God in spirit and in truth because we know we're a creature in desperate need of God's love. and we have to keep it real if we're going to do it properly. Be quiet. I spoke about this on Sunday, so I won't labour it now, but have you noticed how everybody runs around saying, "How are you? I'm quiet, I'm exhausted, I'm frantic, I'm run off my feet." And I talked about how it's now sometimes a competition. I do in fact have this friend who has to be the busiest person he knows. He has to win the busyness competition every single time. But compulsive activity is in fact the enemy of true peace. And I said on Sunday again that some people can get through an enormous amount of work and be serene about it. And every so often I can too. Like people say, "Oh, you work very hard as a priest," and I love everything that I do. I love my ministry. But sometimes there's an extraordinary things you have to get through in any one day. But actually you just navigate the day fairly serenely because it's okay. Because we're grounded in what really matters. So keeping holy the Sabbath day was about coming back regularly just to touch the things that matter, that get us through the week. So the Sabbath for the Jews, of course, was Saturday. It's Sunday for us since the first day of the resurrection. But it's where we become more contemplative and we try and take that into the week, that we're not compulsed in our behaviour. Honour our father and mother. Respect age. Now, I want to say a few things about this. The commandment to respect age is not about the calendar, but it's about valuing wisdom and experience. Just because you get to a great age doesn't mean that you've got any great wisdom or any great wisdom that you could share. It's actually that you've got to a big age. Sometimes young people can have incredible insight. And we all know that. You know, when you teach kids in class, as I've done, when you've got kids at home, every so often their insight into something is quite magnificent, is quite extraordinary. So age is not, the respect of age is about those who have reflected on their experience and learnt from it, which is what it's all about. Respecting age is an interplay between memory and gratitude. I think two of the great gifts in the Bible. We're constantly told to remember in the Bible, particularly the Old Testament. Never forget, remember, recall. One of the great sins you could commit in the Old Testament was to forget. Forget God's goodness, God's fidelity, God's love. So to remember. But how do we remember as Christians? Jesus introduced the idea of remembering with gratitude. The attitude of gratitude. We remember gratefully. And of course the word Eucharist is to mean to give thanks. Eucharistonte in Greek, to give thanks. And sometimes gratitude can be tough. Mother's Day and Father's Day are complex days for some people. You know, in your country and mine, we celebrate these, and so we should. I've got no problem in celebrating Mother's Day and Father's Day, but I always make a point of saying there are some people this Sunday, because it's always on a Sunday, who have very complex memories and experiences of their mother or father, living or dead. And so for some people it needs to be a day about healing and of peace and some sort of reconciliation. Sometimes we have people who have to forgive their parents for being their parents. And sometimes we need a few people who think they can, you know, their mum and dad was always a disaster and they can always do better. Well, sometimes you find out when you've got your own kids, it's a lot more complex than you ever thought it was going to be. In fact, my favourite definition of the word justice is when kids have kids of their own. Because all of a sudden, it wasn't as easy as it looked when we were 15 and we thought they were mucking it up. In fact, it can be I take my hat off to every parent here today. Young, old, middle-aged, I don't care. I think parenting has never been harder and it's never had less support. But I want to tell you about my mother. I've talked about her before, but I want to tell you about that woman. My mother was a nun. Now that sounds like the beginning of a song. But my mother was a nun. That's Sister Mary Theresia in 1955. And my mother entered the convent for a couple of years, and then, thank God, she saw the light and she got out. Or else I wouldn't be standing here, I can assure you. In fact, the day she left the convent's a great story. She was going to take her vows in a couple of weeks' time, and her mother and father came to visit. And in those days, you couldn't eat with nuns. You couldn't see them eat anyway. You could eat in front of them, but they couldn't eat in front of you. Don't ask me why. I have no idea why that rule ever existed, but it did. And so my mother sat there. As soon as she saw her parents, she hadn't seen them for 2.5 years. She wasn't allowed. She knew that she shouldn't become a nun. She tried to get out 6 months earlier, but they had put a lot of pressure on her to stay. And she says herself, she settled and didn't give it a second thought until the moment she saw her parents. And she knew that she shouldn't be there. So she sat there for 2 hours with this dreadful afternoon tea that they had bought, but she couldn't enjoy, and thought of her escape plan from here on in. The bell went for benediction for the Sisters of Mercy novices to go back into the chapel and adore the Blessed Sacrament. And Mum said to her parents, "Go to the car, I've made something for you." In those days, nuns did needlework and craft and other things. So what she did, in fact, was go to the laundry. She grabbed a scarf for a head, she grabbed a blouse and a skirt and a pair of shoes, raced up to her bedroom, took all that regalia off, got into a civvies, jumped in the back of the car and said to my grandparents, "I'm coming home." And all the way home for 2 hours from the capital city of Queensland, Brisbane, to Toowoomba, my grandfather apparently said all the way home, "We're going to hell. We're all going to hell. Oh my God, you're going to hell and you're taking us with you. We're all going to go to hell. Oh my God, we're going to hell." And my grandmother apparently said, "Oh, shut up, Tom. If the girl wasn't happy, she shouldn't be in the convent. She'll only make other people's lives unhappy." My grandmother was the best theologian in that car. That's absolutely true. And then there was a pause and a period, and my grandfather said, "We're going to hell. We're all going to go to hell." Now, as you know, because I have told you some of these stories before, that's a very important photograph in my family's life. That's my mother, age 32, my father, 36, my brother, 7, that's Peter, that's Tracy, who's 5, and I'm 2. I still wear that outfit. I think it's special. That's me. I'm terribly cute in the front there in the red and white outfit. Wonderful. You didn't know that my father was going to be dead 2 weeks after that photograph was about to happen. He died at 36 of a massive stroke, a berry aneurysm, not carrying any weight. He looked incredibly fit and healthy, and to everybody's idea, he was. But my mother was about to become a widow with 3 children, under 7 and under. And in fact, my mother never remarried. She seriously never looked for another husband, but she would joke, "I was a catch, but I had the 3 of you." And as you know, my sister later, who went to Mother Teresa, came back, you know this story well, she ended up in a car accident and became a quadriplegic. And my mother nursed her at home for 27 of 28 years that she was a quadriplegic. And as you know, because I told you when I was here last time, she died in 2017. So my mother got up at midnight, 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock every single night for 27 years to turn her quadriplegic daughter. There's love. That's what a parent will do for a child. Respect age. Boy, I respect my mum. But my mother now has dementia. And when we were hoping that her life would be easy and gentle after Tracy's death, well, it hasn't been as much as we would always like. My mother always prayed that Tracy would die first. And that prayer was unexpectedly answered on the 18th of March 2017. But Mum then would praise now that she would die soon afterwards. So even in her dementia, and she's still going through this, we're not quite there yet, so she's quite aware some days of what she's doing and what she's saying. But some of you have been through this. You know how heartbreaking this whole thing is and can be. And my mother keeps saying, "I want you to pray that I die soon and go to heaven." She said, "There's nothing wrong in praying to die, is there?" And I said, "No, as long as you can't do anything about getting there." But she said, "No, you can pray to die if you want. So I want you to pray that I die and go to heaven. She always says, and go to heaven. I said, you're very confident about where you're going to go, aren't you? And she said, I'd like to see God deny me heaven. I would too. Because if she's not going to heaven, I'm going to battle to get in there, I can assure you. But there have been a couple of other wonderful moments in the last couple of years, even with Mum's dementia. During lockdown, there was a period I couldn't get into that state in Australia. And in fact, I was 4.5 months before I could get back to see my mother. And she was sitting in the sunlight of the nursing home she's in now. And I walked in and she looked beautiful. And I just got very teary. And as she looked up, she said, she didn't say hello or anything like that. She said, what are you crying for? And I said, well, I haven't seen you for 4.5 months and I've really missed you. And Mum turned to me and she said, oh, no one's missed you. Which sort of put everything in perspective. That sort of was good. Here was I thinking my mother had been pining for me. Well, apparently not. And then I went back the next day and the day after that. And a couple of days later, I was in town for a few weeks and I said, Mum said, how long are you going to be here for? And I said, I'm going to be here for, I think, about 4 or 5 weeks. Oh. I said, aren't you enjoying my scintillating conversation? And she said, Richard, let's face it, a little bit of you goes a terribly long way. And indeed, there are some wonderful moments where she now thinks her mother's alive. So if her mother, my grandmother, was alive, the great theologian of the car, if my grandmother was alive, she would be 122. But she said to me, Mum said to me recently, I haven't heard from Nana for a while, which is what we called her mother, and she called her too. Haven't heard from Nana for a while. And I didn't know whether to tell her or not. So I said, maybe that's because Nana's in heaven with God. And I thought there was a gap, and I thought, oh dear, I hope I haven't traumatised Mum. And she said, oh, that's why I haven't heard from her then. So we've got to respect age. And all I can tell you is, Nancy Reagan once said that Ronald Reagan's dementia, his Alzheimer's, she said, I'm not sure it was original, but she's the first one I remember her saying, that she's in the time of the long goodbye. My brothers and sisters, my mother's had a tough life. By anybody's standards, at least by white, developed country standards, Mum's had a tough life. And it's not easy now. Value what you've got, because you don't know what you've got until it's gone. Value it every day, and let's value one another while we can. You shall not murder. Do not kill, for all murder is suicide. Pope Francis said, if you asked me who I think the poorest of the poor is in the world right now, I would say Mother Earth. We are killing her. He says it's the right to life issue. Now, for some in the church, those of us who are passionate about abortion and the right to life for the unborn, people got terribly worked up when the Pope said this. But he came back and he said, look, I'm making the rather unexceptional point that if we don't have a planet, none of us are going to be alive. So he wasn't running away from right to life issues. He was saying we've never thought as ecology and environment and our duty to our planet as a right to life issue, but it absolutely is. And in the Bible, of course, we're called to live in harmony with creation. And Laudato Si', his great letter of caring for creation, is without question one of the greatest, because he basically says in there, we are called to give this to other generations richer than for us having been there, to inherit, enjoy and thrive, and to pass on. And of course, as we all know, we are in danger of that not being the case. When we go over to do not commit adultery, mean what you say. You know, no one's ever forced to take any vows, but you'd swear by the way some people go on about it that they are, either as a nun, a brother or a priest, or in married life. No one's forced to take these vows, and we all knew that they would be complex and demand things of us. Do you know there is no marriage law ever in the world that I'm aware of for which the word love is used? You can't legislate love. So Marriage Acts in your states and the Commonwealth of Australia never mentions the word love because you can't legislate love. But in the Christian church we can. Now, as you know, I do a lot of weddings and I love doing weddings. I really enjoy it. But I have, and I've said this before, but I've got a couple more to add to it now. There are a couple of wonderful things that I've been asked to sing at weddings over the years. I don't know how to love him, to which I used to say, if you don't, you shouldn't be here. And think of the rest of the song. And I've had so many men before. Now we're talking. In very many ways. He's just one more. Who thinks singing that at the Catholic sacrament of marriage is a good idea? But I've had some wonderful ones. What's Love Got to Do With It by Tina Turner. I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For. I love You Can't Always Get What You Want. And recently I had And Another One's Gone, and Another One's Gone. Another one bites the dust. Yeah. Another one bites the dust. But without question, the best song I've ever heard sung at a Catholic wedding ceremony happened to me a couple of years ago in Sydney. We had the groom's favourite song for the signing of the register. I don't think they'd quite thought that one through. Yesterday, all my troubles seemed so far away. Now it looks as though they're here to stay. Oh, I believe in yesterday. Really? Who thought that was a good idea? But think about the wedding vows. They're immensely powerful. I, Jill, will take you, Jack, to be my husband. I promise to be true to you in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, for better or worse, for richer or poorer. I will love you and honour you all the days of my life. Notice it does not go on to say, and I'm going to stay with you, and even if you fracture my skull or break my jaw. Can we get clear? In Christian marriage, we are called to die to self, not kill self. No vow ever asks us to be dehumanized, to be sacrificed to the point of our own mental, emotional, and physical health. We are not called to that. Those marriages are many things, they're not Christian. And the vow, therefore, does not apply. Get the kids, get out of there, get safe, let the dust settle, and see what may be the best thing to happen next. But we have to be very careful. We don't stay there being dehumanized. Christ never asks that. That doesn't mean we pack up at the slightest bit of trouble. It means we do have sacrificial love, but it's a balance. We die to self, we don't kill ourselves. Jesus didn't say kill yourself, he said die to self. And it's very important that we hold that intention. I want to tell you a very quick story about a wonderful woman, my Auntie Mercia. My Auntie Mercia got married to an American in 1946. He was a captain on General MacArthur's staff who was in Brisbane at the time. He was dashing, he was handsome, and he was from Philadelphia. He was an Episcopalian. They got married at St. Stephen's Cathedral in 1965, the Catholic cathedral. They couldn't get married in front of the high altar because he was Episcopalian and didn't convert to Catholicism. So they got married at a side altar, but he did agree to raise the children Catholic. When they were going back to Philadelphia from Brisbane, Australia, now demobbed after World War II, Mercia was pregnant with their first child, my cousin Tony. And when they got to Philadelphia, for the very first time, my auntie met her mother-in-law, who didn't like her one little bit for lots of reasons. Firstly, she wasn't a US citizen, and secondly, she was a Catholic. And she declared that no grandchild of hers would be a papist, and that if that child is baptized a Catholic, I will disinherit all of you. And with that, her brave army captain had been on MacArthur's staff, caved into his mother-in-law and his mother and said, oh, we'll have to baptize the child, an Episcopalian. Tony was born, and when he was 2 weeks old, my Auntie Mercia bundled him up, took him to the Jesuit church in Philadelphia, had him baptized, got back here to Los Angeles, and got home, because whoever she married in Australia was not the man she found in Philadelphia. He was completely and utterly dominated by his aristocratic mother. And all I know is that Mercy came home because of her faith in part. She came back then in 1947, now soon to be a divorcee. She met a wonderful man, a single Catholic man, who wanted to marry her in 1950, and they fell in love. She went to the local Monsignor, who was a great Irishman, and I knew him personally. He's a wonderful man. But Edward Kincannon, Monsignor Kincannon, said, "Well, you cannot get married, of course, because you're a divorcee." She left her husband and Philadelphia in part because of the faith. And now the very faith that she had tried to defend now shut her out. Do you know, they did get married in a registry office in 1951. They had a child in 1952, another one in 1953. And they went to Mass for 16 years without ever receiving Holy Communion, because they were told they couldn't receive Holy Communion. 16 years. And eventually, by the late 60s, they just stopped going. When I was doing canon law, I did annulments of marriages. And all of a sudden, we were hearing about how you get an annulment and why that. And of course, they were very rare in previous generations, but now they were much more common. So I suggested to my Auntie Mercia that she might have a good case for an annulment. It took a while, but eventually we got her there to talk to the canon lawyer. And all I can say, in one of the happiest things I've ever done, I was ordained in 1993, and I was on the 11th of December. On the 20th of December 1993, I presided at the nuptial mass for my uncle and auntie. They got married in the church in 1993, and with tears down their face, they received Holy Communion for the first time in decades. Oh, the way we've treated divorced and remarried people in our community has been scandalous. The pain that these people, the exclusion, has been palpably tasted. And yet every one of theirs is a human story behind it. No wonder the Pope has said we've got to be full of mercy in our community. We've got to understand who we are and what we're doing. Let's keep that in mind when we defend vigorously how important married life is. You shall not die, for all the world will die. You shall not steal. 27% of the world's population consumes 75% of the world's resources. You and I, that's Australia and the United States, along with all the OECD countries, we're 25% of the world's population. We consume 75% of the resources. And in fact, we often talk about ourselves as being lucky to be a US citizen or lucky to be Australia. We're not lucky, not by Christian standards. We're blessed. And that's a different category. Luck means it just happened to us. We're lucky. Well, you're welcome to believe that. But when you're blessed, as your blessing goes up, so does your obligation go to share. So we're all called to share with one another because our blessing has been so significant. And your own country and mine are generous, but we've got to think about how we make the world a better place for all God's children. And this, of course, is connected to the Eucharist. Pedro Rupe was the boss of the Jesuits for 27 years, and he said at the Eucharistic Congress in Philadelphia, actually, he said, if there is hunger anywhere in the world, then our celebration of the Eucharist is somehow incomplete. By that, he wasn't saying we weren't receiving the body and blood of Christ. He was saying our action following from this table to every table is connected. That the food of life, the bread of life we receive in this church is meant to send us out so that all people might be fed. They're connected. That was the wonderful point he was making. And it's all about what we do, not just at this table, but what we do away from it. In the new missal, one of the dismissals that priests can say, which I say almost all the time now, is go in peace, announcing the gospel with our lives. Our lives might be the only Bible that anybody will ever read. Our justice and joy might be the only sacrament they will ever celebrate. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbour. Honour others, their frailties are usually your own. This is all a call to forgiveness and indeed to mercy. Now, Exodus 21, what we inherited was that it was an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot. And as I've already said, Jesus inherited that tradition, but he completely changed it. He made a break with it, that we don't get into revenge. And that was why the Year of Mercy from Pope Francis was so magnificent. And at one stage, when he was reflecting on the word honour, Pope Francis says, to honour someone starts with being compassionate. Why? The word compassion comes from two Latin words, compati and panis. Compati, fellow feeling, panis, bread, penne, bread. So, panis. What's it like to be a woman in a man's world, to be black in a white world, to be poor in a rich world, to be gay in a straight world, to be divorced in a married world, to be disabled in an abled world? That's what we're called to do. What's it like from their point of view? That's the call of the gospel. It's tough. But we imagine the world from their point of view and try and reach out to people as compassionately as we can. Why panis? Because in the ancient world, you didn't eat with your enemies. You ate with your friends, because they could poison you. So you ate with your friends. And therefore, there's an act of intimacy. Charity is a good thing, but it tends to be one way. I'm rich, you're poor, let me give you money. That's a good thing. I'm not saying it isn't. Compassion invites us into a relationship with those whom the Lord has made his own along with us. So we're called to be completely in solidarity with those who the Lord stands with. And the last one, be kind, be generous, and don't sleep around. Now, the word covet is an interesting word. We've always heard it negatively, to be the sin of covetousness. Actually, the word itself in Hebrew actually means to desire something. You can have good desires and bad desires. It's not all bad to desire things. So we always hear it as a negative. But I'd like to recraft it somewhat, and I do in this book, The Law of Love, that we need to recraft our desires. We need to bring them more in line with the desires of Christ himself. And I want to suggest it's one simple thing. For the life of me, I think we have completely underrated how powerful it is to be kind to one another. Just be kind to one another. It's not too much to ask, and it's not that hard to do. And what I'm about to say, a kind thing to say, well then don't say it if it's not. And what I'm about to do, a kind thing to do, well, if it isn't, don't do it, and try and find something else to covet. To covet something can be a positive thing in its original idea. To be covetous, to have covetousness, is the negative side of that, where I want what they've got, envy and jealousy. You know, pride, greed, envy, anger, lust, gluttony, and sloth, the 7 deadly sins. You didn't know you were going to do the 7 deadly sins here tonight, but here we go. Pride, greed, envy, anger, gluttony, lust, gluttony, and sloth. I had a wonderful Irish nun who taught me in grade 3 called Sister Mary St. Benedict. She was over 6 foot tall. I'm not making that up. I met her later in life. She was over 6 foot tall. And in all the old regalia, she looked even taller. Behind her back, we called her Gigantor. And Gigantor loved the word sloth. She used to say, sorry for the Irish here because I always do the accent, but every drop in me is Irish and I love my Irish heritage. I'm so proud of it. But she used to say, you lot are the most slothful bunch I've ever had the misfortune to teach. In the 27 years I've been in Australia, I've never known the sloth like I know it in this classroom right now. And if you don't stop the sloth, you'll be going to hell for eternity. Johnny Davis was my best friend in grade 3, and he turned to me one day after one of these tirades and he said, "What's sloth?" I said, "I don't know, but we've got to stop doing it or we're going to go to hell." Well, jealousy and envy are in there as deadly sins. The reason those things are deadly is because they deaden our human spirit. When we always want what somebody else wants, you don't value what you've got. So I want us to covet a good thing, which is to be as kind to one another in what we say and what we do. I want to finish tonight by telling you a final story then about how we can actually set ourselves up with the Ten Commandments when we live them, and how they can make a claim of us as a basis for us becoming people who can be instruments of Christ's love in the world. Because remember, these are all the beginnings. They're not the end points. They're the beginnings. They just need a bit of a refresh in the language for us to realise how powerful they are. And I want to tell you a story about where it doesn't matter where you start, it matters where Christ will finish it. Where the beginnings is not where God is going to end the story. That picture up on the screen is the Catholic hospital in Brisbane, run and owned by the Sisters of Mercy, called the Mater Misericordiae, the Mother of Mercy Hospital. And it's the biggest Catholic hospital in Australia. Private hospital, children's hospital, adult hospital, and an adult public and women's hospital, a midwifery hospital. And when I was a seminarian, I was sent there to work in pastoral care for a couple of months. And I went to a Christmas party in the occupational therapy department. Everybody told me, you've got to go to the occupational therapy department's Christmas party. And I didn't know why. And then eventually someone spilled the beans and said, well, they have ovens. And they have ovens for splints that they make for people's hands and legs and other parts of the anatomy. But those ovens for the Christmas party become good for pizzas and pies and other things. So everybody wanted to go to their Christmas party. So I eventually ingratiated myself and got myself invited to the occupational therapy Christmas party. While I was there, I met the extraordinary woman who for 22 years had been the charge nurse of the maternity department of labour ward. She was the boss of labour ward. And I got talking to her and I said, look, you know, I'm never going to have a child of my own, so do you think I could come and watch a birth? Well, she couldn't see what there would be a problem about that. So in those days, we didn't have mobile phones, but she had a pager number. So she took down my pager number. So this is mid-December. Weeks and weeks and weeks went by. Apparently, a student priest watching you have a baby is not the easiest sell in the world. And I saw her in the lift at one stage and she said, look, I haven't forgotten you, but can I tell you, it hasn't been easy. Even though in the public hospital with young women who are going through birth on their own, I've suggested having a student priest and, you know, it hasn't quite worked out, but I'll redouble my efforts, I promise. So I got the call and she said, get yourself up here. Now, I only had 1 week to go in this placement in the hospital, so it came at exactly the right time. So I got into labour ward. And there I met, she met me at the lift, and as we were going in, she said, now, before we get into the labour unit, I have to say a couple of things. Firstly, I haven't told a lie, but I haven't told the whole truth either. I asked this young woman that you're going in to accompany her through her birth. She's 15 years of age. It is her first child. And I asked her whether she would like to have a student accompany her through the birth. I'm pretty sure she thinks you're a student doctor, not a student priest. I never told a lie, I just didn't tell the whole story. So whatever you do from here on in, do not mention Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Saviour. So I got inside to be introduced to the birthing mother. You can't make this up. Her name was Mary. Seriously, that was her name. Like, if I was making this story up, I would not call her Mary. She was called Mary. Now, I met Mary a couple of hours into her labour, which was an unusual circumstance in which to meet your birthing partner. She had very little breath, mainly because she had no breath at all. But from my vast experience of having a baby, I thought everything was going along quite wonderfully, and because the midwife had given me all the instructions I needed. The midwife, when I arrived, told me to do a couple of things. She said, take Mary's hand, don't you dare faint, because I have one patient here and I don't want two. Thirdly, hold on to her hand, and when I tell her to breathe and push and keep it coming, keep it coming, keep it coming, rest, 2, 3, and breathe and push and keep it coming, 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 keep it. I've just brought back wonderful memories for some of you. You do it too. I thought everything was going along very, very well and wonderful because I'd had so much experience of birth that all I know is the doctor turned up to do an episiotomy. Now, if you don't know what that is, you don't want to. Men, go home and look it up on YouTube. I'm telling you right now, if men went through any of this, there would be no children. I take my hat off to every woman who has ever had a baby, anywhere, everywhere in the world. Well, within a few minutes, the baby was born. And we all were laughing and crying and so happy that all of these marvellous things had happened. And after the tears came the laughter and the joy, and the reality of Mary's incredibly tough situation was happily postponed. Being in the solidarity in the trenches took a whole new meaning for me that night. It was extraordinary. After the birth, Mary found out that I was a student priest, and rather than be upset about it, she thought that her son was blessed by God. So much so that the next day she asked me to do Benjamin's baptism. I couldn't do it because I was a seminarian. I wasn't a priest or a deacon, so I couldn't do it. But I did arrange, shortly after she got out of hospital, to be baptised by a priest friend of mine in Brisbane, and I am very proudly Benjamin Michael's godfather, and very honoured to be so too. I hope if he was here, he'd applaud, but anyway, he is a wonderful fellow. More on him in a minute. But when he was about 4, they came from a very, very tough part of town in Brisbane, and I took my godfather duties pretty seriously, and I decided that I should do something about making sure he's okay. So I went to Mary. She had gone on to have 3 more children to 3 different men. So we've got 4 boys under 5, and he must have been 5 by this stage, and he was ready to go to school, and I was worried. So I went along and asked, could Ben, would you think about if I can get a scholarship or something, could we take him off to the local Catholic primary school, St Mark's? And there I met the nun who was in charge of St Mark's, Sister Mary St Francis Xavier. She was as formidable as her name. She interviewed Mary and her husband Daniel, and she said, now, I have a few rules. I want the boys cleaned every morning here on time. They have to do their homework, and they have to turn up to school. They're my 4 rules. I will arrange a scholarship for these boys, but they have to be here on time, doing their homework, clean and ready to go. Fine. Well, they all agreed. No problem at all. In fact, they tell the time of when I think he must have been in year 5, Ben was in 5 and his brothers were in lower years, that they all would not go to school one day. Their stepfather was away on work, and their mother couldn't get them to go to school. That was on Monday. The same thing happened on Tuesday. On Wednesday, Sister Mary St Francis Xavier thought, this is strange, all 4 are away for 2 full days and now the 3rd. So without ringing, she got in her car, went around to the house, said to Mary, I want to see the boys, they must be terribly sick, and found them playing soccer in the backyard, 2 apiece. And this nun stood at the back door of their home and said, get inside, get dressed, get in my car and get to school. Mary said it was magnificent because any time they wanted to take a day off school from there on in, she said, you go to school or the Wicked Witch is turning up any time soon. When Benjamin was very good at school and the local high school had a terrible reputation, so Sister Mary St Francis Xavier, and I didn't know this, had 10 brothers and sisters. She was one of 11. And she explained the situation to her brothers and sisters and said, I'd like these kids to go to a good Catholic Christian Brothers school, which was on the train line. I need the train pass, I need the fees paid, I need books, I need uniforms. And between those 10 wonderful brothers and sisters, they all set up a little fund for this family. All those boys, on their own merits, got in on the scholarship, and they went off to St Lawrence's Christian Brothers College in Toowoomba. To this day, Benjamin, my godson, has a PhD in physical therapy. He now lectures in that at a very distinguished university in the United Kingdom. I'm going to see him on this trip. We've remained very close. His brother Daniel is an accountant. He works for an international accounting firm. He's in New York City. I'm having dinner with him tomorrow night. I'm catching the red eye tonight. And Kai is a social worker. He now works back in that area of Brisbane where they all grew up, passionately wanting to see other kids have opportunities he had. And the youngest boy, Noah, is a nurse. Can you believe he's just finished a diploma in obstetrics? Now, 20 years ago, I received Mary and her husband Danny into the Catholic Church. She now volunteers with the St Vincent de Paul Society in the hostel for domestic violence and abused mothers, and she tells me some of the young women there are 15 and pregnant. Wouldn't she have an ally? Imagine arriving and you meet Mary with her story. Now, from a complex conception, a messy birth, a willing midwife, and a vulnerable baby, extraordinary grace, amazing grace has gone from one generation to the next. Why does any of this matter? Because when you live the 10 Commandments, you don't have to worry about where you start. You worry about where Christ is going to finish it. Because they're not the end, they're the springboard into all of us looking after each other in exactly the way that Christ intended, that we are all sons and daughters, brothers and sisters of the one faith, one joy of being in Christ's family. I don't think any of this is easy. I just think it's necessary. So all the 10 Commandments need is a bit of a makeover with new language to describe profound insights into extraordinary divine and human wisdom. So let me finish by doing what priests do best and blessing us all for the task that we might now take these into our daily lives. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be ever at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. May the rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the hollow of his hand. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the hollow of his hand. And for courage to live these commandments, may we be blessed. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Thanks very much.